Hi.
Hi. Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for having me. And I so appreciate being hosted. It's a really impressive bunch of lectures that you're giving, and an impressive bunch of people who are coming. So thanks to you all. And I want to say to everybody, I know that there is not a single person who is attending who isn't experiencing some sort of challenge, difficulty with this month, last month, next month. And just, I know for some of you, the challenges are huge. And I just wish you and your family the very best in this incredibly difficult time. So thank you for being here. So what I will be telling you about is an intervention that we have developed that, as Paula mentioned, is called Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up, or ABC. And I'll be filling you in on why we developed the components of it, a little bit about what it looks like, and then what the effects are. And I'll be sure to save time, so hold on to your questions, because I'm hoping that you have questions for me. So babies are born to be reliant on their parents. They're reliant on their parents for everything, for regulation of temperature, neuroendocrine regulation, protection from infection, and so forth. We are wired this way. We're made this way. We've evolved to expect that a parent be available. And so when a parent doesn't function as an effective co-regulator, there are consequences. And the times when this doesn't happen is when a parent is not available at all, in the most extreme cases of a child placed in orphanage care or institutional care, but also a child who is neglected or abused by a parent, or a child who is placed into foster care. And so what we know is that when children experience challenges in caregiving, they're at risk for several types of adversity. In fact, a lot of types of adversity. The ones that I will focus on are attachment. We know that the risk for disorganized attachment is elevated among children who experience problematic caregiving. We know that children are at risk for problematic biological regulation, and I'm going to go into that. And then problems with executive functioning. You think of executive functioning as this the boss of the brain, where the prefrontal cortex helps to control emotions, control behaviors. And what we know is that children who experience adversity often have challenges in this respect. So in order to deal with these challenges that children face who have experienced adversity, we developed this intervention that we call Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up. It is typically a 10-session intervention. We have just adapted it for opioid-dependent mothers and their infants. And in that case, it's a 12-session intervention where we start a little earlier, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have with regard to that, the adaptations that we've made to that. I'm not planning to talk about that in this presentation, but would be happy to address it. And this ABC targets key issues that we've identified as problematic for children who have experienced adversity. It's implemented in the home, and this is something that we consider quite important. And the reason that we think it's important is because what you'll see as I go through this, we give parents a lot of practice in the behaviors that we want them to adopt. And so we comment upon those behaviors a lot. And if we did that not in the home, they wouldn't get practice in the context in which they live. And so we think it's really important that they get the practice in the environment in which they're going to be using these behaviors. So the three things that we focus on, and these are the same for, I'd mentioned that the other intervention for opioid-dependent moms is different. It's really quite similar. It's just, it's adapted, but it has these same components. We focus on nurturance, following the lead, and avoiding intrusive or frightening behaviors. And what we expect is that then is going to enhance children's attachment quality and their biological regulation. So what we know, our first component is nurturance. And what we know is that nurturance is especially important if children have experienced adversity, because they're at risk for developing what's known as a disorganized attachment if they don't have a nurturing caregiver. Disorganized attachment, I think probably a lot of you know the attachment and so forth, but disorganized attachment is the most problematic and puts children at the greatest risk, because children with a disorganized attachment are not able to rely upon their parents in a systematic, organized fashion. So we know nurture is important. We found that in one of our very early studies, in which we found that even when children had a parent that wouldn't otherwise have predicted that they develop a disorganized attachment, if the parent wasn't nurturing, the children were at risk for disorganized attachment. But there's two things that we found that can get in the way. One is that the child may push the caregiver away. I want to first show you an example of a child who is not pushing his parent away. This child is able to go to his mom when he's sort of distressed. This is in the strange situation. This is how we assess attachment. He has been separated from his mother for 3 minutes, and he is playing pretty listlessly here. And the reason I can show this video is that he is the child of somebody who was part of our staff. And I'm not able to show you a lot of videos that I love to show you. Instead, I'll just play the audio, but here I can play the video. And what you see is this child when his mother returns to the room.
Jared! Hey, man! What you doing? Hey, what you doing, Mom?
So this child makes it really easy for this mom to be nurturing. And it's certainly related to her behavior in the past that, in all likelihood, this mom has been very sensitive and responsive in the past. But what is striking is how much, if you were this mom, you would want to pick this child up, or if you were the dad, you would want to pick this child up. It's rewarding. It feels good to pick this child up. Now I'm going to show you a video of a child who has been separated at the border. And what you see here is he is just being reunited after a several month separation from his mother. And what I want you to think about is the impact upon his mother of his behavior. It's very difficult to watch that. I know, and I'm sorry. This is from somebody in our study, and you can just hear her articulating her feelings as her child responds in a similar way as what you just saw. And this is just in a 3-minute separation. This is not, a 2-month separation, but this is a 3-minute separation, and her child looks indifferent to her when she comes back.
You don't care. What's this? All right, you don't care about mom.
So what you can hear, what you saw with that first child who goes to his mom and it just feels good. And, you can almost imagine her oxytocin being released, as opposed to the second two children where she's probably feeling rejected by that child. And we studied this in children who were placed into foster care. And we looked at parents who might have been quite nurturing under other circumstances. And what we found is that when children turned away from them, they turned away in response to the child. So this child behavior was very powerful in eliciting complementary or in-kind behavior. So if the child turned away, the parent acted as if the child did not need him or her. And when the child was fussy and inconsolable, what we found is that parents got fussy in response. I sometimes give an example of my own child here, and I will do that. I divorced when my children were 2 and 4, and by the time my youngest was about 2 and a half, he started spending the night at his dad's house, just one night, and he hadn't ever been taken care of by anybody other than me. I had never gone away on trips or anything, and his dad hadn't been a very this isn't to speak badly, but he just hadn't been very involved in caretaking activities. And my son came back the first night from that and was just almost flailing. His arms and legs flailing out, and pretty angry. I was aware of is it elicited in me a sort of fussy response, a response such as, wait, you can't behave like that. And I was developing this intervention, and so that's not what I said. What I said instead was, I think you're mad because I wasn't with you last night. And with that, he just put his head on my shoulder and said, that's why I'm mad. And you can hear there the importance of understanding the underlying message. I need you, even though I can't show it directly. And so this is actually a first intervention component for us. I'll just say a little bit more about another thing that can get in the way, though. Nurturance doesn't come naturally to some parents. This is an example of a mom who is being very non-nurturing. I just want to make sure that you get what I mean by nurturance and non-nurturance, but you can hear.
Ouch. Yep, exactly. I told you. It's okay. Let me see. It's okay. It's okay. You're not broken.
Now, that one's hard to watch as well, and I apologize, but I think you hear here a number of ways in this one example of ways that you can say, you don't need me. She says she first fussed at him. He'd been playing he'd got his finger stuck in a drawer, and she had been telling him not to play with the drawer. But still, what I tell parents is no matter how much you've been fussing at them, you've just got to be nurturing and nothing else but nurturing once they get hurt. So she fussed at him first, and then she said, oh, that's okay, which it's not up to her whether it's okay. And then it's not broken, which I think is kind of making fun of it in a way. So yeah, a bunch of ways that another thing that we see often in ways that parents are not nurturing is when they're looking for the real cause. They're looking, is he hungry? Does he need to have his diaper changed? If it's not any of these things, then it's nothing. And we want to change that. We want the mom, dad, you are what matters here. And that's, that just being there is what we want you to do. But I think I've mentioned a bunch of these other things. One thing that certainly we say a lot in this culture is you're a big boy, or big boys don't cry. You're a brave soldier, things like that. And then one that seems pretty innocuous, but is distracting. There's a butterfly, or here's a toy, or here's a popsicle. And we all do those from time to time, but as a rule, what we want is the parent to be the source of reassurance. We want her to be willing to be there for the child rather than turn the child's attention away. All of these give the child the message, don't come to me with your distress. So our first target for intervention is provide nurturance, even when the child doesn't elicit it, and even if it doesn't come naturally. So this child needs you, even though she may not appear to need you. And we do this in two different ways. One is through manualized content, and we present videos of other parents and themselves, things like what you've already seen. And we present evidence, research evidence, supporting the importance of nurturing care. We cite studies from, for example, sometimes people will say, I see that child not crying and I think he's fine. He doesn't need his parent. And you say, yeah, that's what you think, isn't it? But babies need their parent. And in fact, here's an example when and we talk about a study with Alan Strofe and heart rate and so forth. Or we talk about when sometimes parents will say, I want my child to be tough and therefore I'm not going to pick him up. We say, exactly, that's what you'd think. But what Mary Ainsworth found is that if you pick up your baby more early, they're going to cry less by the time they're a year old. So we cite studies of that sort. And we do this in the first two sessions but we continue with our emphasis on all of these targets throughout. The second thing is we call this the active ingredient, the in-the-moment comments that we make. And this is probably what sets our intervention apart from most other interventions, is the very precise way in which we want parent coaches to interact. And here is an example, and I'm sorry that I can't let you see it, but this child is fussing, and the parent coach is saying what you can see here.
Okay. All right, honey.
good job nurturing him. He's crying and you're holding him. Even though it's hard for him to settle down, that lets him know you're there for him. It feels very natural as you hear this here. And yet what she's doing is she's doing exactly what we want. But I think it doesn't sound rote. So these comments can have one, two, or three of these components. It can describe the parent's behavior, can link it to a target, it can link it to a child outcome. So first, the describing the behavior, he's crying and you're holding him. The reason that matters is if we don't, at least some of the time, describe very
sitting
clearly,
here like that the whole time.
very clearly, the parents. Sorry, if we don't describe very clearly the parent behavior, then what happens is that parents want to do what we're helping them to do, but they'll spiral someplace else, and they may start trying to, like if she just said, "Oh, great job," the mom might start getting teachy or something like that. Do something very different. Link it to the intervention target here, just mentioning nurturance somehow. Good job nurturing him, and she said that. And the reason for that is we're talking about nurturance in general, and what we want to do is we want her to see how her behavior fits with this general intervention target. And third, link it to a child outcome. That lets him know you're there for him. And we have research-based outcomes that parent coaches essentially are allowed to say, and we don't want them to say things that there isn't an evidence base for, because we are very much a research-based intervention, and we want everything that they say to be accurate. So that's an example of how we do it. And believe it or not, then we take, let's say you're seeing 10 cases in a week. We take one of those cases and 5 minutes from that case, and we don't tell the parent coaches what that's going to be ahead. We just pull it randomly, and then we code it, and we ask the parent coach to code it as well. And what they code it for is the in the moment comments, basically. And so every opportunity for an in the moment comment is when a parent has behaved in a way that's following the lead, nurturing, or frightening, or off target. So they code it, then they code it for which of those it was. And in this case, it is a child cries while mother's holding him. That's a 5, which is nurturance. And then describe the parent coach and the reliability coder indicate what the parent coach said. And here they do just verbatim, he's crying and you're holding him, etc. And then you put what target is that, and that's 5 again, that's nurturance, and then how many components, and she included all 3 of the components as we went through. And so at the end of this, then you get a number of metrics, which I'll show you when we get to in the moment coding for following the lead. But you get all these metrics about how close you are to meeting our criteria. We want you to not miss more than 50% of the opportunities for commenting, for example. And we want them to be on target X amount and so forth. So the second target is following the child's lead. And why is that? Well, what we knew is that early adversity leads to biological dysregulation. We knew this with non-human studies. And then we conducted, I should say, it had been looked at in terms of the HPA axis in particular, looking at cortisol as an end product of this HPA axis, HPA referring to hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. And there are 2 functions of this HPA axis. And you may know cortisol as being a stress hormone. And that's one of the things, is when you are stressed, when public speaking is one of the best stressors for adults. So my cortisol is probably higher right now than yours is, and higher than it was. But the other is a diurnal function. And this is something that hadn't gotten as much play really. But we function as diurnal creatures. And that's partly, we have a number of systems that help us function as diurnal creatures. And one of them is this production of cortisol, where we have high production of cortisol in the morning. When you wake up, it's high. About 30 minutes after wake up, it peaks, and then it comes down really quickly to a near 0 level at night. And this is what helps you go to bed at night. This is what helps you have more energy in the morning. And it's not the case that you're more stressed in the morning. It's just that this reflects the metabolism of glucose. So if you think about changing from a day shift to a night shift, or traveling across 6 time zones, either of those, that's going to make this out of whack. So, and it's going to take a while until you get this diurnal production of cortisol back in the way it should be functioning. So what we've looked at is whether this diurnal production of cortisol was sort of messed up or out of whack among children who experienced more adversity. And we found among low-risk children a nice high morning value, low evening. With foster children, it was a flatter pattern, lower morning value. And then what we saw among neglected children is the flattest pattern of all, low morning, flat across the day. So we saw this and we thought, how do we help children develop better biological regulation? It was really a big finding in terms of thinking about implications for intervention, but it wasn't altogether clear how one would do that. So and you know that that's true with behavioral regulation, is that children who have experienced adversity show more dysregulation. So what we looked at is the literature, and we found that not through experimental studies, but just through longitudinal studies, that when parents followed their children's lead, children had better self-regulation. And so what we thought is, okay, we're going to help parents follow the lead better. And I'll show you an example of this, or not show you, you can hear it. This is a little 3-year-old boy. He's looking for a monkey.
Where's the monkey?
Still following. I think I see him.
Where's the monkey? You found him. Good job. This is so great to see, because to him you are his.
So a real simple example. It's one of the ways that one can follow the lead is vocally, just making a comment on what the child's doing. And another is to behaviorally, which is certainly what one wants to do with a younger child. And I've got just a beautiful example of that. I apologize, I can't show you, but these smooth interactions are regulating. And sometimes when people are puzzled by this, you may not be, but what I liken it to is if you think about telling something that you went through this weekend that you were worried about. Let's say you were worried about your father-in-law who in his health, because you were afraid he was exposed to somebody with COVID. And you told somebody and they said, oh, that's nothing. Listen to what happened to me and my such and such. That's jarring to you versus somebody who says, oh my gosh, tell me, what's his health like? And somebody who listens to you and follows that. And what I think is important for people to realize is that children don't have any control over who their interactive partners are. And so they're dependent upon upon the parent for being responsive to them. And they can't go and choose somebody else who will listen to their weekend plans better than the parent. I think that, well, I'll show, this is that same mom when she is not following the lead.
Oh, what's this, Ross? What is that?
E.
No, what letter is that?
E.
What is it?
C.
You know this one. What is that?
C.
M.
So same mom, pre-intervention, and this is for our toddler intervention, not our baby intervention, but here she's not following his lead, and if you were to continue watching this intervention, he doesn't stay very engaged with her very long. She becomes pretty boring pretty fast. So ways of not following the lead. You may think about these yourself, but taking control, correcting the child. With young babies, a lot of sort of mildly intrusive things, messing with the child's head, messing with the child's face, things like that, or ignoring the child. And all of these behaviors are either can be jarring or dysregulating, or at least not regulating. And we specifically do this in sessions 3 and 4. And we do it in the same way through the intervention manual content, but also through making comments in the moment. And I apologize for not showing you the videos, but I still think the audio is useful to illustrate here.
You want it back? There you go. And that's perfect. Like every, like little things like that, you know, we're talking about responding to baby signals, and even just reaching out for something and you giving it to her, that's going to make her feel important and like she can have an effect on things around her.
Okay.
So again, we're expecting one of these comments every minute, which is a lot, and it could seem like it could be overwhelming, but if somebody is skillful, these comments just are very smooth, and the parent responds very well to them. So she described the behavior, like her reaching out for something and you're giving it to her. She didn't link it to the target, but if she had, she would have said something like, wow, you're following our lead right now. And she did link it to an outcome. That's going to make her feel important and like she can have an effect on things around her. And I won't go over this, but this is that same coding sheet. And then these are some of the metrics. There are more metrics that we get, but you get things like total, the percentage of on-target comments, the percent of missed opportunities, the on-target comments per minute, and so forth. So we get these metrics, and then that allows us to monitor and give feedback every week to parent coaches. And the third target is avoiding intrusive and frightening behavior. What we know, and this was something that we had developed our intervention working with foster parents. And then when we started working with high-risk birth parents, and we were just doing these first two components, we were running into frightening behavior. And what we knew from the literature is that intrusive and frightening behavior undermines children's ability to regulate behavior in biology. And so what we reasoned is that even if we got people nurturing and following the lead, that what was going to happen is that we weren't going to be able to see the gains associated with those things, because the frightening behavior was going to really undermine any gains. So we do this in sessions 5 and 6, and we don't, although we make comments with regard to these behaviors, some of the time we're much more cautious with these behaviors than we are with others, because almost all of our comments are positive, and we don't want parents to feel judged. We don't want parents to feel like we're the expert and they're not. Instead, we want to build them up and strengthen them. And so we do this very gently. We start with things in session 5, like tickling and puppets, things that almost anybody will get in a child's face with regard to. And then we move on to things that are more, quote, frankly frightening in session 6. And that's really the entree to then session 7 and 8, where we get into overriding what we call voices from the past. And voices from the past, what we think of there, it's, I know Alicia Lieberman spoke to this group a couple of days ago, and I think it's, we certainly borrowed from her way of thinking 20 years ago before she had a manualized intervention or anything, but in talking with her that, and it's just much simpler than what she does. We don't go into the depth. We don't try to work through the trauma, but what our intention is to get people aware enough of what their issues are so that they can override them. I would say what Alicia does through child-parent psychotherapy is she tries to work through those so that those issues are not a problem anymore. And this is a very short intervention, so we don't do that. We don't work through them. We would need more time to do that. But instead, what we do is we try to get parents aware enough. And I'll give an example here, again, of my own, and that is that my very, wonderful in so many ways mother wasn't very nurturing. She was the sort that would say, look at the butterfly out the window. And so when I had children and knew I wanted to be nurturing, if my child banged his head, my immediate response was, how do I make it better really quickly? But what I could do, because I learned to override the voices, is I could stop and say, I want to do that because of the way I was raised, but what he needs is just for me to be there for him, just to let him cry and just hold him while he cries, rather than get him to not cry. So that's the example that I think is is what we want parents to be able to do, is to be able to have a thing. It doesn't even have to be it doesn't matter that it's the issue that is the most core issue but something so that it'll allow them to take a step back and provide nurturance, or not frighten or follow the lead, even though it doesn't come naturally to them. And then in our last 2 sessions, we consolidate. We work on the things that we've been working on. And, throughout all 10 sessions, we're making these comments 60 times an hour. Think of that. So that's what we continue to do there. So to assess the effectiveness of this intervention, we did a randomized clinical trial, meaning we took 120 children and families and randomized them to either ABC or to an alternate intervention. And this alternate intervention looked the same. It was same structured the same, 10 weekly sessions in the home. Parents didn't know, our parent coaches cared just as much about how DEF, developmental education, was being implemented, but it didn't have the sensitivity part in it. And we've done this randomized clinical trial now for foster children, high-risk birth children, children adopted after orphanage care, toddlers, and now we're doing one more with opioid-dependent moms. And we've found similar effects, but I'm going to tell you mostly about our high-risk birth parents, because those are the ones we're following the longest. We're now following them all the way to 13, 14, and 15 years of age. So first, you see, we wanted to affect attachment and regulation. And if you think of this child as the prototype of the secure child, and this child that you saw, there's no way you would assess attachment, of course, with a child being reunited, but that was resistant behavior or disorganized behavior, actually, he was showing there. But so what we get when we look at ABC kids is 52% of our children that were randomized to the ABC group showed secure attachments, as contrasted with 33% of children in the control group. So that's a really nice effect. That's about what we see wherever we go, but I'm delighted with that. We've improved our intervention a lot since then, so I'm eager to look now with our current version, our current iteration of the intervention. With cortisol, remember what we wanted this to be a steeper slope. We didn't want these children to have such a flat pattern with a low morning. And what we found right after the intervention, the red is the ABC, we find these children in ABC to have a higher morning value of cortisol and a significantly steeper slope across the day. This is our control children who have this flat slope, control being DEF, the children in the other intervention. So this is 1 month after the intervention, you see this more normal. So these kids should, if you back to us being diurnal creatures, you should be seeing accompanying that perhaps more energy in the morning, be better able to sleep at night, and so forth. What we see 3 years after the intervention is the same pattern, is just as big an effect. Higher morning value for ABC, steeper across the day. To be honest, this is not what I expected. I did not think there was any way that we would continue to have an effect 3 years after the intervention. And there are a number of places in which we've seen it. We continue to see cortisol effects at age 8, but it's mediated through sensitivity. So you see the intervention effects on sensitivity on cortisol. So then inhibitory control, that I would say that this is the key to success for children in school, doing what you're supposed to do and not doing what you're not supposed to do. So inhibiting that thing, that desire to jump up and look out the window or get a pencil off somebody's desk. That matters more than you knowing your numbers and your letters. And so what we do is we give children an attractive set of toys and tell them not to play with them. And here you can see them.
Now remember, when I'm doing my work, don't touch any of these toys, okay?
So it seems cruel, but this is what I would suggest even in preschool. Children, when you think of circle time, when there's all the toys around the room and children have to be sitting and doing what they're supposed to do instead of getting up and playing with the toys. So this is tough. It's boring for him to color, but it's a task that is so similar to other tasks that children experience, and I think very related to their abilities in this other context. And what I'm going to show you here, or you can hear, is this child, the child that I didn't just show you was able to sit there the entire time. After about 60 seconds, he looked up and he said to Kristen, the researcher, said, "I'm finished," and just kept working. This is another child who doesn't do that. Oh no, this is the unfinished. This is the child who has real trouble with the task, and you could just hear.
Not touching it.
That's touching the toy. All right, I'm gonna have to move these toys away.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Because the toys are just for looking at right now.
He takes the table and turns it upside down. So very different reactions from children. So the children in the ABC intervention, fewer of these children touched the toys, only 34%, contrasted with 53% in the DEF intervention. They also touched it for less of the time. They waited longer to touch it. So we're seeing intervention effects on inhibitory control, attachment, and cortisol. In middle childhood now, first I want to just tell you a little bit about the Kearns security scale. Is ask children. This is the first time you can ask children really, how much can you count on your parent? And this is 15 items, and we sum these. And what we find is that children in the ABC intervention say they can count on their moms more than children in the DEF intervention. So this is at about age 8 or 9 after a 10-session intervention. So I want you to think about, why would that be the case? How do you explain this? And then child brain activation. We assess this through fMRI, and we present, I'll show you 2 tasks. One is they see neutral or fear faces, and what they do is they just push a button when they see the butterfly. But what we're interested in is the fear versus the neutral faces. And what we find first is that all of the high risk, both the ABC and the DEF, show greater activation in areas, occipital cortices and fusiform gyres, sort of the noticing the threat, the alerting to the threat. Both of our high risk groups show more of this than children who are low risk. So you might say, uh-oh, is this not good for ABC? But what you find is that ABC kids have greater activation in some of the prefrontal areas, the anterior cingulate, the right orbital frontal cortex, areas that are more involved in regulation of this threat. And so I think of this as, we don't change the nature to which children in the ABC group experience threat, but we do change their ability to regulate, their ability to think about, well, did that kid really mean to push me just then? You know, everybody may alert when they get pushed on the playground, but the ABC kids are perhaps better able to stop and think. And again, this is from brain imaging data. I think I'll pass over this one, but to say that they see pictures of their mothers and pictures of strangers. And what we find, and this is an in-press article now, is that we see differences in areas that suggest greater salience or specialness of the mom among the ABC than in the DEF. Again, 8 years after the intervention. And then we see a more mature cerebral cortex when we look just at neural activity. This is through EEG. We put electrodes on their heads. So you see these effects across a range of outcomes. Some of them I've mentioned, some I haven't. DNA methylation I haven't mentioned. That's changes to the DNA that occur because of experience, language development, emotion expression. I think I've mentioned a lot of them. Autonomic nervous system regulation. So why would that happen? Well, it's got to be parents. We never talk to the children. We don't address any of our comments to the children. So we're not changing the children. The parents are changing the children. And so we're changing sensitivity for one thing. When we see this in every study that we do, parents who receive ABC are more sensitive, and these effects are sustained at least 3 years after the intervention. That you still see these. And second, you change parents' neural activity. You change, when you look at neglecting parents, they can tell you which baby's crying and which baby's smiling. But their neural activity doesn't show any difference between these faces. And let me show you what we found. We found that low-risk parents, like us, this is what's called the N170. That's 170 milliseconds after they see this face. You see that right along here, these faces are distinguished from one another. The crying, neutral, and laughing are distinguished from one another. So this is an automatic processing that you see among non-neglecting parents, low-risk parents. But among our DEF, those that were randomized to the DEF group, you didn't see a difference. Even though they could tell you who was crying and who was not, their neural activity didn't reflect these differences in affect. But you do see it in the ABC. You see differences in our ABC group in the neural activity. So to me, well, I got one more thing I'll tell you real quickly about here with, is we also get differences in secure-based script assessment 8 years after the intervention in moms. We ask them to tell stories, moms, with words that could elicit a attachment theme. And what we find is that ABC moms tell more coherent, more secure narratives. So you see these differences in parents that are sustained over time, and you see these differences in children. So I want to say one more thing quickly before getting to questions, but be thinking of your questions. And that is that, so we've got an effective intervention. We've got an intervention that changes parents in ways that we think are the mechanism. Changing the parent is the mechanism, and that will change these child outcomes. But how do you implement this in the field? And as a field in the community, we have dismal effects. And why is that? Well, usually when you take an intervention and then you implement it someplace where it wasn't designed, it's not being implemented in the way that was intended necessarily, or at least not with fidelity. But I think because we didn't start out this way, to be honest. I could take you through the steps, but we didn't start out articulating really carefully how it was that we were going to quantify what we were doing. But as time went on, we got better and better at that. And in the moment commenting was the place that we knew was central to our outcomes. We found that in the moment commenting predicted parent changes, and we knew that parent changes changed children. So how do you get people to make in the moment comments, and how do you know if they're making them? At first we were horrible. Nobody wanted to make these comments. I remember going in supervision sessions and it would be, people would make 0 comments or 1 or 2, and we wanted 60 across the hour. So this was a real challenge, and I'm happy to tell you more about it, but basically at this point what we do is we assess this weekly at a microanalytic level in the way that I've described. And a key part is that parent coaches are doing their own coding of themselves every single week. I'm guessing, but I think the reason that's so powerful is that people become their own critics. People go around, from what I've heard anecdotally, parent coaches, and say they go to the grocery store and they code. They code all the time once they learn to code. We know, we've done a study because we're a bunch of nerdy researchers / clinicians, but we know that when people learn code themselves, that's when they make these changes. That's when they become good at making the comments. And now we have an alignment of screening. We screen people to make sure they'll be able to become good at this. We train. We have just 2 days of training. And then we supervise across a year, 30 minutes for this in-the-moment coding. And then we have more traditional clinical supervision for 60 minutes. And then that's our certification, is based on making these comments. And what's exciting is that then in the community, we see, and this is dissemination sites around the country, we see effects that are as big in the community as we see in the lab. Sensitivity, this is pre-intervention, post-intervention. You see a large effect in terms of decreases in intrusiveness. Positive regard, you see a little bit, but not much. That's what we see in the lab as well. So I want to thank all. I don't even think I have everybody up here, but this is a big team and a lot of people other than me that have done most of the work, and have gotten wonderful grant support and donor support over time. And finally, this is a book that Kristen Bernard and I have written on this intervention that goes through the various, for infants, for toddlers, and so forth. It's published by Guilford. And I don't know if you can see it, but I've got our website here, www.abcintervention.org, if you want any information about training. So I will now open it up to questions, if that's all right. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. If you put your PowerPoint, if you take it off the share, then we'll be able to see more faces here. There you go.
Oh, good. Nice, okay. Thanks.
I'm going to have Christina, our research assistant, is going to lead the questions because she is so good at it. But I will start off, Christina, and ask the first one, which is, what are you doing with your at-home approach during this particular time?
Thank you for asking. Yes, this was, for the last, I don't know, 3 years, I have been wanting to move to a trying telehealth. And I've been discouraged from it, to be honest, by my dissemination, the people who are in charge of dissemination. And the nice thing is that we had to start telehealth. What you wouldn't think you could make these comments in the moment over the phone, would you? And yet, what is so exciting for us is that we are getting parents to set their phone up or an iPad or something, and we are making comments. And it's shocking me. I thought it would be a much steeper learning curve, but we are able to make comments. I've even have heard parent coaches say it's easier because it's not, the dog's not climbing over them and the 3 kids aren't climbing on them. But it sounds like ABC. We don't know yet whether it's effective, but that is what we will certainly be assessing that. But we're working very hard to do ABC through having the parent turn on the phone. What I have found is just I got a little $15 tripod, a little tiny one for my phone so that I could practice my tennis stroke. And I find that that's really useful for parent. That's a cheap thing we can give them. We've got different places, and I know that we've got a lot of people in Oklahoma doing ABC, but we've got different places are doing different things and running into different challenges. But I know in New York City, they're working to get hotspots in various areas. So if internet connectivity is a problem, then overcoming that and so forth. But that's some of my answer.
Okay, thank you. Christina, are you here?
Hi, Paula. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Why don't you, I'm sure you've been keeping good track of these questions. There are a lot of them.
There were. We have so many questions for you. Thank you so much for your presentation. We have a question here. Do you offer ABC intervention sessions in Spanish? If so, where?
Well, what we do, I haven't described this, we train parent coaches. And so what we do, like in Oklahoma, there's been several big trainings, I know, but in different parts of the country, if you had an agency that you said, we've got 8 people who want to get trained, we would come there, or Israel, or wherever it is. If you've got 1 person or 2 people, then what we do is we invite people to come to Delaware for a training that will involve more people. And so we train people up, and then we do this supervision through across the year. So in terms of providing the treatment, it's not that we would provide it, but if you have somebody who is a parent coach who is Spanish speaking, we have supervisors who can do the supervision, both the in the moment commenting and the regular supervision in Spanish.
Awesome, thank you. The next question we have is, does a parent's lack of nurturing lead to RAD, reactive attachment?
I'm going to take that question apart a little bit in my way of thinking. So I would think that one of the issues, I don't think so much in terms of reactive attachment disorder. I think more in terms of indiscriminate sociability, that so I'm going to turn it into terms that I know better. And for the person that asked the question, tell me if I'm not answering it the way you intended. But so if a parent is not nurturing, are they more likely to develop this indiscriminate sociability or the going to other people? I don't know that we have any evidence of that, to be honest. I know that being not nurturing, if a child's experienced distress, is more likely to lead them to be disorganized in attachment, but that is somewhat orthogonal or independent of reactive attachment disorder. So I think that I don't know the answer to the question, but I don't know that it would have an impact.
Thank you. I know we addressed this a little bit before, but there's a question. What are the barriers you find of this intervention since it is done at home?
Well, it's interesting because I think of what it allows, the opportunities rather than the barriers. But for barriers, it's one of the challenges is that it costs so much more. And so people often want to do this intervention, want permission to do it in an office. And we will rarely say yes to that. I mean, the only time that we would be willing to do it out of the home is if the home is dangerous and the parent, like we've had a parent who's just not willing to have us there because the dad is scary and doesn't want us there. But I think so it costs a lot more. You got to get there, you got to get gas. So all of those things make it harder. But I think that one of the things that I think is really an opportunity is that so many parents who would never get in for a meeting, never make it to the office, are there. It may take us 2 times or 3 times of knocking on the door, which we do. But I think most of our highest risk people wouldn't make it to an office. So I think the opportunity is so striking there. Feel free, anybody, to challenge me on these things if you want to.
Thank you. The next question is, has there been any research with teens?
With teen mothers, do you think that meant?
I'm not sure. Either teen mothers or teen children.
Our intervention is from birth to 2 for our infant version and 2 to 4 for our toddlers, but we do follow children through teenage years. And so we're now just looking at effects of this early intervention on teens whose parents had this when they were babies. And I know not at all what that will yield, but I'm optimistic given that 8, 9, and 10, we saw such great effects, and everything becomes unglued at times in adolescence. I'm optimistic that we will see intervention effects. In terms of teen parents, we have included teen parents as some of our people that we've intervened with, but I haven't taken it apart in terms of knowing different effects on them. But it's always, every time you change populations a little bit, the challenges are different. I think of one 15-year-old mom who was still in foster care herself, and it was, she just wanted a break from her baby and wanted to be able to get on Facebook, and that was probably the biggest challenge. And so the challenges are always different for everybody, but I think teenage moms fit under this, and sort of the skill development that we still works. With opioid moms, I think because that is certainly, I know that's big in Oklahoma and a big problem here, is that so many of the moms come in feeling so guilty about what they've done to their children. And ABC is remarkably helpful because it helps people feel good about themselves and their parenting and their ability to help make things okay. So and I don't know but that's just sort of how anecdotal evidence of different populations, how things play out differently.
Thank you. Do you see different results based on culture?
Well, we it's been asked a lot, is this a Western intervention, or it was developed mostly to start with from Philadelphia, high-risk African American parents. But what I would say is that we've now used this intervention in probably 10 different countries and 20 some different states of this United States. And what I would argue is that the things you're trying to get people to do are universal. They're things that even you want to see with a monkey mother being more nurturing and more sensitive is what leads to better outcomes for monkey mothers. And I would say it's universal among humans. So, but what you run into that's different is different things that feel odd to people. So whether following the lead might feel very odd in some cultures, nurturing can be odd in other cultures. But it certainly is not something like, I think that a lot of, sometimes people would be concerned that, is this a Western European intervention that is then being changed around, or Western European based? And what I would say is Western European parents tend to have as much problems with these targets as anybody else of being non-nurturing, being the sort of hop up, you're okay, and not following the lead. I think there are other cultures who are sort of somewhat less likely to have problems with one or more of these. So that's a very convoluted answer to a very complicated question.
Okay, here's one. What types of professionals can take this intervention training? I'm an OT in an infants and toddlers program and would be interested if possible.
Well, we started this not knowing whether we needed a degree in particular or a background or experience. And we didn't think that we did. And that's exactly what has been borne out, is that sometimes people with a PhD in psychology can't do it very well. And sometimes people with a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree can. And that's why, so the answer is yes, whatever field somebody's from, if this seems compatible with your interest, if these are things that you think matter, then it's probably a good fit. As I said, we do screening to make sure that it's a good fit because we want to be 100% successful. We want every parent coach who comes through to become good at this. And we want every single parent coach who then does this to be successful with their parents. The example of the extreme, and I'm not saying that I think that people could use their master's in social work or their PhD in psychology to be useful for this. But we have people who have gone through the intervention in Brooklyn who are very high risk parents from inner city who have been sort of parents who have gone through the program who have then become parent coaches. And they've become very competent parent coaches. And that's without any particular background in psychology and no particular degree. So I would say it's degree less, and that was a problem for us until we came up with our screening, because we were getting people who weren't going to be good at it until we had our screening. I want to thank everybody so much. Thanks for your attention. I've been, I could see people's faces and see people's attentiveness, and I really appreciate it. Please don't hesitate. I forgot to put my email on, but don't hesitate to get in touch with me if I can answer. It's mdozier@udel.edu, but I'm happy.
Easy to find on Google.
Yes.
Very easy to find you on Google. That's right. So we also would like to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us here. It's really been very helpful, very interesting. And I'm going to say goodbye to you and ask anybody who's interested in CEUs to stay on for the incomparable Christina, who will tell you what to do. Thank you, Mary. Take care.